slama dječjim, rasti i cvijetaj zemljo radnih ljudi i neka mir nad tvojim ljudima vlada. Mir tvojim lađama napučini i tvome danu što se vedar budi. Rasti sretna da svi narodi vide sa strana svih, sa juga i sjevera, kako se rađa i kako se voli, kako se brani zemlja proletera. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Sreći u vodi i u zraku, u pjesmi strojeva i u sjaju žita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, pod rukom partije i pod srcem Tita. Rasti i cvjetaj pod zvijezdom slobode, Tita. самых окраин, южный город северных морей. Человек проходит, как хозяин необъятной родины своей. Тут жизнь невольна и широка, точно Волга полная течет. Молодым везде у нас дорога, старикам везде у нас почет. Страна моя родная, благословение, благословение. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. За столом никто у нас не лишний, по заслугам каждый награжден. Золотыми буквами мы пишем всенародный сталинский закон. Этих слов величие и славу никакие годы не сотрут. Человек всегда имеет право на учение, подвиг и на труд. Страна моя родная, благословение, благословение. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. Над страной весенний ветер веет, с каждым днем все радостнее жить. И никто на свете не умеет лучше нас смеяться и любить. Но сурово брови мы насупим, если враг захочет нас сломать. Как небесную родину мы любим, бережем, как ласковую мать. Страна моя родная, благословение, благословение. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. Я другой такой страны не знаю, я такой на тысячу лет. ce știm noi din vremuri strămoșești, cuvânt de dor și luptă, de doine și povești. Dar dacă astăzi pacea e lege și sfut, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut. Cuvinte le-am moștenit în grai, doar bănuiam ce înseamnă, ce tâlcuri au sub strai. Dar dacă astăzi tâlcul de plin l-am priceput, e pentru că pe lume partidul s-a născut.
Greetings everybody and welcome along. It is the evening of the 24th of September 2024 and we are here tonight with you for another live stream. We are coming to you on Rumble, on X and on YouTube for now. Recent bannings from YouTube lead me to believe that perhaps the more popular you become on YouTube, the more likely it is, of course, you are going to get the boot if you're an anti-imperialist channel of any kind. So if you haven't done so already, be sure to sign up for the Rumble channel that we are running, where, of course, the same stream takes place. I may be starting to do some of the more, shall we say, controversial content episodes on Rumble exclusively. Who knows? If it works for Jimmy Dore's pro-Trump channel, maybe it'll work for me. So, now we are going to start tonight with a bit of a diversion. We will be getting to Zelensky in the United States, but I wanted to share with you something that I think you as discerning observers of the political world will appreciate. And that is, of course, the antics of a certain Sir Keir Starmer. So I'm just not going to give this any commentary. I'm just going to play it for you. Enjoy.
At the border between Lebanon and Israel. Again, all parties to pull back from the brink. I call again for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The return of the sausages, the hostages.
Right, so you heard it here first. Keir Starmer calls for the return of the Israeli sausages. Make note of that. It is, of course, a classic gaffe from Sir Keir, a man less articulate than a concussed cat. But there you go. Quite why you'd confuse sausages with hostages, I'm not sure. Maybe his mind was on other things. But I wanted to start with that because, of course, we will be covering the situation in West Asia tomorrow. And that will be a much more serious program, of course. But some levity for that situation is not out of order entirely, particularly when it comes from such a buffoonish and obnoxious figure as Keir Starmer. Now, we move on to, of course, the main subject of the program, which is the visit of a certain Vladimir Zelensky to the United States to speak at the United Nations. And we'll be having some of the speech he gave at the United Nations in just a moment. Now, the ostensible reason for his visit over there is, of course, to meet with Biden, to meet with Trump, to seek guarantees, security guarantees, as he puts it, to sell what he calls Ukraine's victory plan. Now, that victory plan looks about the same as his so-called peace plan. And the so-called peace plan, lest we forget, calls for the complete withdrawal of all Russian forces from everywhere, including Crimea. And only then can talks take place. So basically, he calls, well, we'll get into who's calling for this in just a moment, but Zelensky demands, or he is expressing the demand for the complete capitulation of the Russian state, which of course the Russian state isn't going to do. So his victory plan basically amounts to a demand that Ukraine be allowed into NATO immediately, and that this will form part of the negotiation process over the peace plan, which remains the same. So let's hear from Zelensky to outline his thoughts today at the United Nations. He doesn't make any kind of hilarious slip-up like Keir Starmer did, but it is pretty much equally ridiculous. So let's hear from Zelensky. As you can see here from the screen share, Yermak and the others are paying almost no attention to him already. They're all on their phones. But let's continue.
Putin has stolen much already, but never steal the world's future, I'm sure. We are now preparing for the second peace summit, moving forward with our partners step by step according to the peace formula. And we are working on food security, energy, holding accountable. We will address all other points of the peace formula, including the release of prisoners, the restoration of territorial integrity, and more. And we are preparing a document to present at the second peace summit. I invite all leaders, nations to continue supporting our joint efforts for a just and peaceful future.
Right, so if you heard all of that correctly, Zelensky is, of course, demanding the adherence to his peace formula. Now, the peace formula is, of course, as I said, the demand for total, utter Russian capitulation. And that, of course, is not going to happen. So what on earth is he going on about? Well, it's not some kind of peace formula. The peace summit that was held in Switzerland a few months ago without any Russian presence there was just essentially an irrelevant talking shop. So what on earth is Zelensky going on about is the question. Now, what is the essence of the problem here when it comes to most people's view of this? Now, the way in which the Zelensky has, of course, been sold to the general population in Britain and the United States is, of course, as the great struggling hero, desperately working to overcome the evil machinations of Putin. The reality is, of course, a lot different. The reality is, of course, that Zelensky is the long-term project of a certain Mr. Igor Kolomoisky, who was elevated into power principally by Kolomoisky's influence, and then after that has been essentially a puppet of the West. And whatever independent plans Zelensky had, and there were some originally, like originally he wanted to make peace with the East and then was told that he could not. Originally he wanted to reach some sort of settlement with the Russians and then was told that he could not. So where does this nonsensical peace plan come from? And here I will reiterate what I've said on numerous occasions before, but I will reiterate it because a lot of people keep not understanding this. Not talking about you, dear viewers, of course. I'm just talking about the wider world of, shall we say, multipolar analysts. The Zelensky peace plan is not a creation of Zelensky. Nothing that Zelensky does or says should be regarded as anything other than an expression of whatever his handlers in London and Washington have programmed into him. So when Zelensky comes up with a so-called peace plan that effectively demands complete Russian capitulation, you can almost guarantee that it's not his idea, because Zelensky's idea was to negotiate, and was to negotiate in the Minsk and then the Istanbul format. It was only when, of course, Boris Johnson went over there and said, in essence, you've got to continue this war, otherwise you're dead. I mean, I'm summarising there, but this is the essence of the conversation that Johnson really had with Zelensky, which is that Zelensky was asking back in April 2022 for security guarantees from the West. Now, of course, this already points to the fact that Zelensky is a profoundly stupid man in this respect, which is that you can never trust a guarantee from an imperialist power. If you do, then you're an absolute fool. Zelensky clearly is a fool. But he was asking for these guarantees principally, I think, for his own safety, not for the safety of Ukrainians. He clearly does not give less than two shits about them. But he is concerned about the safety of himself and his own family. And so what he was asking for was the backing of the US and the British in signing this deal that was on offer in April of 2022. The British, of course, and the acting as errand boys for the United States, told him that was unacceptable. There would be no guarantees forthcoming from the Western powers unless, of course, Ukraine carried on fighting until total victory. That is what I think that Johnson told Zelensky back in 2022. And it's after that that Zelensky passes he puts forward his decree barring all negotiations with Putin, essentially, and then demanding that his peace plan be the only plan that is accepted, which is, of course, as I said, the demand for the total capitulation of the Russian Federation. Everybody knows that the Russians aren't going to accept that, so why does Zelensky keep going on about it? Zelensky embraced this because he was told that this was the conditions. These were the conditions under which he would continue to receive backing. Now, I don't know whether it was Boris Johnson himself who said this, or whether it was somebody with more of a clue about what was going on, but this is this is why he keeps repeating this formula, because this is the formula he was told to say. He, as we've covered in previous weeks, the Ukrainian state is wholly owned and controlled by its bondholders, by the holders of its debt, who are mainly residing, of course, in the West, almost exclusively residing in the West these days, and of course, who are ultimately all expressions of US imperialism. US imperialism controls Ukraine from top to bottom. They control its government, they control all of its government ministries, they controlled it long before February of 2022. They control the Zelensky government from top to bottom. So the idea that Zelensky is an independent actor expressing things that he's come up with, or that the Ukrainian government has come up with, this is false. There is no Zelensky peace plan. There is only a plan that was given to him by the British and the United States that he was told to express as the only acceptable option. Now note, as with everything else, like the question is always, well, who would benefit from such a proposal? Who would benefit from Russia capitulating like that? Well, it isn't Ukraine. Not really. That's already been beggared by its debts. It would be, of course, the US and British imperialists. That peace plan of Zelensky's is an expression of their war aims. Their war aims were always, and remain, to cause a collapse of the Russian central government, to force the removal of President Putin and those that surround him, engage in either regime change or the controlled demolition, as they would say, of the state structure of the Russian Federation. This is, and again, like I know that this is a repetition of things that we've said before on this channel, but it cannot be repeated enough. The aim of the US imperialists and the British imperialists, with the French and the Germans joining them in this objective later, is to cause the collapse of the Russian Federation as a state. And this is an objective that they've been working towards since the end of the Soviet period, because they regard the collapse of the Soviet Union as an incomplete process. They have, via their backing of so-called fundamentalist rebels in Chechnya and other places, in reality servants of imperialism, throughout the 1990s and 2000s, this was a project that they took on, the imperialists that is, with a specific purpose in mind, that is, destabilizing and then destroying the Russian Federation, which is too big, still too industrialized, still has too many nuclear weapons retained from the Soviet period, and still poses too much of a strategic challenge to imperialism, regardless of how compromised and how filled with compradors the Russian inner circle has been at various times. The mere fact of its existence as an independent, still highly industrialized, militarily independent power was too much for these people to bear. Their strategic aim is the destruction of the Russian Federation, which is what this Zelensky peace plan would end in, had it actually stood a chance of coming to fruition, if they'd have got some comprador in Moscow installed who would agree to it. So the Zelensky peace plan is nothing of the kind. It is a plan, basically, it's a demand for Russian capitulation that has been written in Britain and in the United States. Zelensky is just an actor delivering lines. That's the reality. This is why you should never treat this as the actions of, never treat Zelensky's actions as the actions of a man who is the head of a sovereign government, but as a servant, a man who is acting a role on behalf of imperialism. That's where his peace plan comes from. And it's never going to get anywhere. So from the point of view of US and British imperialism, the peace plan gets nowhere. So what's the next stage? Well, just keep the war going. Because that's what this peace plan is designed to do. It's not designed to promote peace. It's designed to continue the war at all costs, as long as that cost remains strictly Ukrainian, of course. So that's what Zelensky comes to the US to deliver. Of course, again, they're not his words. It's not his plan. They're not his lines. He's delivering the lines on behalf of his controllers in Washington and London. The aim is to, again, keep the war going as long as they possibly can, in the hope that maybe some destabilization effort will be able to be successful inside Russia. Meanwhile, many more thousands, possibly more hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainians will die in horrific circumstances, and the war will continue. Because if they can't, as I said, if they can't get the collapse of Russia, then they'll just continue the war in the hope that something will occur that takes them in the direction of achieving their strategic goal. And this is why when Lukashenko was asked about the role of Zelensky, he said quite openly, well, Zelensky acts properly when he demands more weapons and more money. Why is that? Because the role he is playing was a role that was given to him by Washington and London. They promised him all the backing in the world. So by going to Washington and London and demanding everything from them, he's only asking for what was promised after all. And so we go back to the same old question, which is, where does this go? How does this end? That is the question that is facing us now. Because if you look at the military situation is only getting worse and worse for, well, the NATO-backed Ukrainian forces. The incursion into Kursk has turned into a bloody disaster, with many, many Ukrainians either killed, wounded, or captured. It was always going to end that way. Their advantage in terms of mobility and rapidity of attack ran out very rapidly after they stormed into the area, and now they're being slowly but surely annihilated. And this was, of course, a force that consisted of a lot of Ukraine's best trained and best equipped troops, all the way down the line outside of. If we leave Kursk and look down the front lines of the what was once eastern Ukraine, you can see that everywhere Ukraine is suffering gigantic losses, and the Russians are in no hurry to speed up their assault, meaning that they're getting everything they need out of these grinding assaults, and eventually there's going to reach a point where there's going to be another collapse and a quicker Russian advance. They don't need to change their plan. Their plan is working, and they can soak up. They can take the hit of the incursion into Kursk because it's going to cost Ukraine, even in the short term, far more than it costs Russia. Yes, the Russian government suffers some political embarrassment in the short term, but they never stood any chance in hell of getting near the Kursk nuclear power plant or any of the other of the goals that have been guessed at. So Zelensky is facing a disaster. He is facing defeat en masse all the way across the front line, from all the way down in Kherson in the far south, all the way up to, well, just outside of the Lugansk People's Republic in the north. So he goes to Washington and starts shouting and twitching and screaming about back us till the bitter end. Again, he's only really trying to secure his own position. Zelensky must, well, let's just maybe not Zelensky. Maybe he's too far gone. But Yermak and Podolyak and the others must know how bad it is. Certainly Sirsky probably knows how bad it is. Certainly Budanov, of the intelligence man, knows how bad it is. So all of these people, what will they be looking for? They're looking for an exit. That's what they're looking for. The only thing that they really want now, they know they're not going to get this victory. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Zelensky after the fourth line of coke still thinks it's possible. But nor are they going to get NATO marching in to save them. This is another thing that keeps kicking around. Zelensky demands entry into NATO. But of course, I think Alexander Mercouris's comment on the Duran on this was actually correct when he said that the demand for entry into NATO isn't serious. Because again, like maybe Zelensky believes it's serious, but I don't think Andrei Yermak does, who's the real boss, I think. Certainly the Ukrainian dissident channels, Legitimny and Resident, think that Yermak is the real boss. Now, so why demand like instant entry into NATO and instant entry into the EU? Because it's a bargaining tactic. I think Mercouris is right about that. So they know they're not going to get that, but they can get more money and they can get more concessions out of the West, and they can secure ultimately their own passage out of Ukraine to become a government in exile. If Zelensky, Yermak, Podolyak, Budanov, Syrskyi maybe, and others continue the war as demanded by the United States and Britain, they continue to sacrifice hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to this machine of blood and death. And if they continue to be good boys and follow orders, they'll get to go and be a government in exile in maybe Florida or New York and get to go on the talk show circuit in the United States. And for this, they are, in the manner of compradors, all compradors, they are willing to, of course, sell the entire country of Ukraine out. They are willing to have hundreds of thousands of more Ukrainians killed in horrific circumstances. This is the grim reality of what rule by comprador bourgeois really means. And we use the word comprador a lot. I'm happy to have played my small part in bringing it back into the wider lexicon. But let's examine it for a moment. And we examine what it means. As I've said before, Stalin says that it comes from, ultimately, a section of a ruling class whose class interests are tied to imperialist capital and can't operate without imperialism. Compradors are, of course, their origin lies within bits of the ruling class who are tied to the West. But their servants, like Zelensky, are people who are tied to the West not through business deals but through direct payments. And a comprador is willing to sacrifice anything, any amount of lives, specifically of the Ukrainian working class in this instance. Any amount of lives is never high enough for them. If the demand from their masters outside of the country is for ever greater amounts of death to continue the war at all costs, then the comprador will dutifully obey. This is what rule by comprador means. It means ultimately that a nation can be killed, can be completely destroyed, as long as the compradors in charge gets to stay where they are or gets an exit point. This is true of Ukraine. It is true also of the Baltic states. It is true also of places like Bulgaria and Romania. It's also true of places like Croatia and Bosnia. Bosnia being, of course, a neo-colony of the United States, same as Kosovo. The people who run all of these places would be more than willing, if the US demanded it of them, to burn or have their entire nations burned down, if it suited the interests of US imperialism. That's the nature of rule by comprador. That for all they will talk and they will yell and they will scream about national pride and unity and fight the enemy, but really these people are just servants of imperialism, and if they're asked to do it, they'll destroy the whole nation and then weep about it on Stephen Colbert's show afterwards. That's the nature of rule by comprador. Cheap prostitutes of the West, who have no deed is beneath them as long as it means pleasing the master in Washington. And it's horrific, and it is a lesson for all of us in what these people can do. I mean, you can also look at other examples. I mean, I've mentioned before the notorious comprador regime of Nikol Pashinyan in Armenia, willing to sacrifice the entire Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh in pursuit of something. An entry into the EU, a promised entry into the EU which will never come. A promised entry into NATO which will never come. I mean, these people sell out for pennies, as it turns out. Cheap, ugly, disgusting people who would willingly burn down their own country for a pat on the head from Joe Biden, or maybe a meeting with Bono. I mean, I joke about that, but this is the low price that these people ask for. It's remarkable. Now, recently, I got some insight into the world of the comprador by actually looking at the role of Indian compradors over 150 years ago that were cultivated, of course, with great care by the British. And what you learn is the comprador is truly a wretched character. It's on a par with a scab in a strike, willing to sell out the wider people, the wider nation, in return for a small amount of personal gain, or completely, as I believe Pashinyan is, in thrall to the mythological status of the West, just the same way Gorbachev was, and various people in the Yeltsin period as well. And there's no crime that these people won't commit if it's either serves their own interest or gets them some more money or some more recognition or some more fame from their masters. It's a disgusting thing to contemplate, but it's a very real phenomenon. Now, pausing here to bring in questions and comments from the floor. I will now scroll to the top and try to capture most of your comments and questions. Paul Mason has joined us, who says he's been spreading the word around conference this week. Apparently he and Wes Streeting will be tuning in. Well, you and Wes are welcome on the programme. Let's have a discussion about NHS privatisation. I'm sure that'll go well. Christopher Rogers joins us. Good evening to you. Edward is looking forward to the Latvian socialist music. Didn't get the video ready in time, Edward. Probably tomorrow for that one. Greetings to Svetlana in Moscow, to Krasavets, who joins us. Working Prole joins us from Austria. Irish Partisan says, Dobre viche, tovarish. I say, Dobre viche, tovarish to you too. Good evening, comrade. Joining Irish Partisan, of course, is our comrade out there in Minsk. In free Belarus, I think is the proper word to call that country. More time needed. Good evening to you out there in Skeggy on the East Coast Riviera. We also have James Goblin, who urges people to like and share. Indeed, you should like and share the video if you haven't done so already. Svetlana says, public sector workers in Ukraine were told yesterday they won't be getting their promised pay rise next year. Meantime, RADA deputies are assured of a 26% salary increase and prosecutors a whopping 71.2% increase. Well, it sounds like Britain. Indeed, indeed the Ukrainians have learnt from us, which is that everybody else gets pay cuts. The servants of the system get a pay rise. And that reason why they're getting pay rises, of course, is to keep them loyal. You stop rebellions by stuffing people's pockets with gold. Very old tactic. Completely disgusting, and one can only hope that the resistance in Ukraine spreads, becomes more and more widespread, and eventually is able to challenge the Zelensky regime, or I should say the Maidan regime, for power. Because only the removal of the Maidan regime is going to end this. And it has to be removed. It would be better for Ukrainians if they were to remove the Maidan regime themselves, and then mercilessly hunt down all of those who put it in place in the first place. The only word given that YouTube is very sensitive, the only word I'll say to you right now is, or the words I should say, is the end of Mussolini is an appropriate example to use when it comes to discussing the word comprador and the practitioners of compradorism in Ukraine. That's probably vague enough to get past the censor. Luca, good evening to you. Robert joins us from Staten Island, USA. Batman is quoting from Bertolt Brecht. That's an original. Batman performing Bertolt Brecht. That's a new one. Buonasera tovarishi din Bucharesti, says Gillian C. That's in Romanian, I'm taking it. Remarkable thing about the Romanian language is, of course, it's very, very similar to Italian. I believe it has its roots in Latin, which is, of course, was brought to the the region once known as Dacia by the Romans, I believe by Trajan, when they conquered the Dacian nation way back in the day. And the Romanian language remains heavily influenced by Latin to this day. Quite a beautiful script, actually, in some ways. It's Latin script, but the flourishes on it are quite beautiful. Luca says, do you think Ukraine is trying to drag its master in a direct confrontation with the Russian Federation by alluding to strikes deep into Russia, or is it just propaganda? I would say that this whole missile strikes into Russia thing is largely a smoke and mirrors trick, as with everything else that Zelensky does. Look, what difference is it really going to make if Ukraine fires some of their limited supply of Storm Shadow missiles or Scalp missiles or ATACMS missiles into Russia itself? What difference is that going to make? Assuming that, of course, the things don't get shot down instantly by Russian air defense. How is that going to change the course of the war? It's not. Everything that the Ukrainians asked to do is essentially a PR move. What they want is, and again, forget the Ukrainians in this, what the people in London and Washington who want to do this want, is smoking rubble in, well, Moscow or St. Petersburg that is, of course, caused by a Western missile being fired. Well, that's what they want. And they hope that by getting that, by hitting targets in Russian cities with Western-provided missiles, they hope that that will ultimately go towards their aim of destabilizing the Russian government. That's what they want. And this is, again, always go back to what are the aims of the war? And the aims of the war are, of course, not dictated by Kiev. They are dictated by London and Washington, principally. Again, London and Washington's aims are always pointed towards their need to destabilize and destroy the current Russian government, maybe even the Russian Federation itself as a state. So what's the point of all this shouting and screaming about firing the missiles deep into Russian territory? It's in the hope that if they do that and they strike some kind of success, that will destabilize the Russian Federation. That will destabilize the current government headed by, of course, President Putin. None of that will happen. Even if they get these things fired off into Russian territory, even if they get past Russian air defense, even if they hit something, the only thing it'll do is piss off more Russians and cause more volunteers to pop up and want to join the Russian army, or the Russian armed forces, I should say. That's all that will happen. So it's a farce. What they're asking for is a farce. What they're asking for is to continue a delusion that they can find, in the words of various internet videos, one weird trick to destabilize Russia. The latest weird trick they've thought of is firing long-range missiles into pre-2022 Russian Federation territory. Ideally hitting buildings with large amounts of people in them and causing mass casualty events, as the Israelis are doing right now in Lebanon. But there's no military objective that is supported by the firing of a few ATACMS or Storm Shadow missiles into Russia proper. This is a farce, as it always is with these demands. Right. Just scrolling through. Greetings to Anthony in Prague. Greetings to Lee. Good evening to you, comrade. Greetings to Old Age 60 and to Sid Hatfield and to James Duffy, who says, better be careful what you say. They're taking YouTube channels down left, right and centre. Well, if they take us down, then we've got a backup. We can go to Rumble, we can go to Odyssey. Again, there's options. So if you've not signed up to Rumble or Odyssey, then let me know. If you can't get Rumble or Odyssey in your country, then let me know. We'll find workarounds. There's locals as well, which I've just opened an account on, or just reactivated an account on, I should say. So we'll be looking to find streaming services which are capable of being accessed by as many people in this audience as possible. Judy says, random fact of the day, the hymn of the USSR and Scatman's World B. Scatman John share the same chord progression. Well, I'll take your word for it there. Working Prole Incorporated says, Joe Stalin was a mighty man was he. He led the Soviet people on the road to victory. All through the revolution, he fought at Lenin's side. There you go, bit of singing for you. That is, of course, nothing upon the vocal talents of the Salfordian native, a certain Ewan McCall, who wrote that song. Check out the original if you haven't done so already. Right, shout out to VLX11387, who is shouting out to the West Coast comrades. We have David King joining us from the Empire's top lapdog, which is, of course, Britain. And we also have Tom Jode and Carolus Maximus. We have Kawabi joining us from the vassal kingdom of Denmark. We have Verena Fraser joining us from the mining colony of Canada. We have Tim Gray with us. Also, we have Peter from Perfidious Albion. BWP, good afternoon to you. Jack Jones shouts out to us from within the belly of the beast. We have a pro NATO guy, or we did have a pro NATO guy in the chat. All I'll say to you, if you are watching still, good sir, is that you're not pro-Ukraine. None of you people who scream and shout about supporting Ukraine are. What you are is pro-US imperialism. And you are propagandizing for the destruction of Ukraine, because that's what you're supporting. Whether you understand that or not, that is essentially what you are doing. You're screaming and yelling and bellowing along on Twitter for the destruction of a whole country. And it's not since 2022 that Ukraine's been being destroyed. Ukraine's been being destroyed since 1991 by its own ruling class, then by the imperialists who got that country sold to them by that treacherous comprador ruling class. So you're not pro-Ukraine. You're pro-imperialism. At least admit what you are. Clinton says, greetings, just to say the Ukraine war has turned me into a tanky. Welcome, brother. The left ignore armed Nazi forces along with the liberal establishment. The left in the imperialist countries is just an adjunct of liberalism. That's all it is. They're all pro-imperialist. They're all into the same weird shit the liberals are. There is nothing working class about the left. Join, as you put it, the tankies and see the truth. Scrolling down. Paul Lacey, you doubt the power of the musical introduction. Well, the musical introduction not only will stay, it will become even longer. There will be no change to the musical introduction. It is a very popular thing here. And if you don't appreciate it, then quite frankly, you don't have any taste. Right, greetings to Freak Unique from Congleton. Greetings to TG Wilson. Greetings to Songs 4K. And Songs 4K is hoping that Vietnamese music makes it onto the playlist. Well, there will be a varied playlist in the future. So I've said before, we're going to be doing unique playlists for the Stalin series and for the World War II series. So I know that somebody's posted a lot of partisan songs into the Telegram group, so I'm going to be taking a look at those. Svetlana says, no Rumble in Russia. Svetlana, do you get Odyssey in Russia? Or do I need to open our YouTube account? Sid Hatfield says, I've long felt that Google was probably a state-backed front company, likely CIA or DIA. Yeah, it was started with seed money from DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. So Google's been like a classic monopoly capitalist company from the start, which is that it's started in a combination of private and public funding. The military is heavily involved from the very beginning as an expression of the US state. And that's what it is. It's always been something which has been linked by 1,000 strands to like the US intelligence and defense establishment. That's what Google is. So it's no surprise that they are restrictive on free speech that gets enough views to make the censors nervous, is it? So that's why we need to find ways around it. I mean, we'll use Twitter or X for now. We'll certainly be using Rumble. I'm considering trying to start streaming on VK, which is the Russian social media channel. But we'll have to see. I mean, what might be necessary to tackle this is doing like different streams on different platforms. So doing something on Rumble and Twitter if we're banned off YouTube, doing something on VK, doing something on maybe our YouTube, doing something on Odyssey, doing something on locals. That might be the way forward. We may also start pre-recording videos and putting them on the website. So I may need to upgrade the website payment plan to host more video on that. So there's ways around it. Like the YouTube's not the be-all and end-all anymore. We can find ways around the censorship. Ashok410 says sausages. Yes, indeed. T.G. Wilson says Cumberland. Perhaps that's what his mind's on. Kazavet says, I had a conversation with a guy at work who astounded me by pretty much being on Russia's side. I don't talk to colleagues about the subject in case I get problems. Yeah, a lot of people avoid that at work, and it's probably advisable given the amount of snitches out there who would run you into HR, but it's always a pleasant surprise to find people who actually are on the level. More people are than you'd think, really. The support for US imperialism, I won't say Ukraine because it's not supporting Ukraine, is very skin deep in a lot of areas. Generally, most of the working class have either just absorbed the propaganda through osmosis and aren't that convinced by it and will be won over really quickly. Or that what you find is that the richer somebody is, the higher up the social ladder that they are, the more likely they are to be actually invested in imperialism prevailing in Ukraine over Russia. Like generally, again, like the more petty bourgeois they are in British terms, the more militantly pro-NATO they'll be. That's why there's so many pro-NATO people in the hierarchy of the Labour Party. Good evening to Comrade Ian Foster. Good to have you with us. Phil S. Norwich Guitar says, son of a sausage maker, with reference to Sir Keir. Just scrolling down. Grassy Knoll asks, why did Zelensky fly to the US and the US military transport aircraft? Because that's probably the only way he feels safe. I don't think he'd trust a Ukrainian aircraft. And it wouldn't be the Russians trying to kill him. It would be other factions in Ukraine. That's why he flew to there in a US aircraft. Again, for Zelensky, I think personally, he's just looking for a way out. So he's going to obey every order that he's given until the bitter end, because that's his only way to safety. His only way to get out into exile, into that villa in Florida, is to obey every order that comes out of Washington. Just scrolling down. How is Zelensky's learning Ukrainian coming along? Well, he probably speaks English better than Ukrainian. Jerry says any soldiers captured by the Russians are happier with the Russians. Seen a lot of videos along those lines, certainly. Nehat Mere says imperialism is creating a proxy religious-themed fake nation in Albania. Do you mean Albania, mate? So sad that those wannabe proxies still have clients. I guess still some imperialist plans still works. Truly sad. Well, first of all, clarify to where you're referring. I mean, Albania has been a pro-imperialist allied state since the fall of socialism there. I remember one of my first really coherent political memories is of the riots against Sali Berisha in Albania back in the 90s. Sad what became of Hoxha's nation. Songs 4K says Zelensky's just chattering to mask the US bottom line to keep Ukraine as a weapons platform. Much closer to the truth than you'll see on CNN there. Sid says Zelensky transparently is what Donald Trump, Joe Biden, Keir Starmer, Boris Johnson, Macron and others are, the facade of responsibility and respectability. Yep. Why did Boris Johnson get used as a messenger? Did he volunteer? Oh, he probably volunteered. I mean, he likes the idea of like being seen as some sort of bold adventurer. Doesn't like the reality, of course. Plus, British prime ministers like to play these games. Also, the British have their own agenda in Ukraine. Let's not forget that. I mean, they go along with the Americans, but they've got their own agenda there, as Kit Clarenberg has correctly surmised. Good evening to Abtin, who says, good evening on this terrible, terrible day. Solidarity with the people of Lebanon and Palestine. Terrible, yes, but as we will cover, I think tomorrow, we'll cover this tomorrow in the West Asia update, the people of Lebanon and Palestine will prevail. I am absolutely confident of that. This is a fight that imperialism will lose, even though, as it always does, before it quits, before it's forced out of anywhere, unfortunately, it will extract a very heavy blood price for its defeat. But defeated it will be. And the future for the nations and the peoples of West Asia at the moment, I would say, is going to be brighter and clearer than the future of for the people in the imperialist nations, unless we act soon and destroy imperialism. Zelensky will die in dark CIA circumstances, says Lone Bart. Don't know. I mean, if he's useful as the head of a supposed government in exile, then maybe they will keep him on. Sid Hatfield says Russia was one pivotal arena of the broader Wolfowitz Doctrine, which became official U.S. foreign policy on September 11, 2001. Well, it'd be, yeah. I mean, it was outlined that way as early as 92, and it's been unofficial policy for the 90s and then official policy since, as Sid says, since 2001, to contain and ultimately try to destroy Russia if it gets too troublesome. Nayat Mere says, situation in Lebanon is very grim. Today I had to call and check up on a friend there. He's okay. They ran away to rural side from the city with family. Schools shut down, etc. You get the picture. Yeah. Again, we'll cover this tomorrow. But this is the long war that will end in the dismantling of Israel and the removal of the U.S. from the region, as Nasrallah has correctly predicted. Again, like the US and its Israeli proxy are going to extract a heavy price from people there, unfortunately, for this. But this ends in their defeat. I'm absolutely confident of that. Zain Mudassir says it's suspicious that none of the jihadi groups in Syria carry out attacks on Israel. It's not that suspicious when you consider that they work for the United States, and that the jihadism that they practice is just a label for a veil behind which the interests of US imperialism dwell. T.G. Wilson says the only consistency in Zelensky delivering these lines is that he still doesn't get a laugh. Yeah, he's less funny than a late period Hale and Pace special. Svetlana says, as for the imperialists not keeping promises, in 1942 they signed an agreement with Molotov promising to share new technological know-how with the USSR. They kept silence about the atom bomb, though. Of course they did, because the atom bomb's primary target was the USSR, always was. It was never about Japan, and it was never about the Nazis. Sid asks, I worry how the West is going to accept such a bloody nose signalled by their humiliating and defeat and ass-kicking in Ukraine. How will they deal with this? Well, they dealt with their disastrous defeat and humiliation to the Taliban by starting another war. So they'll deal with this by starting another war. But they're already engaged in more than one. I mean, you ask, will they end all life on Earth? No. I mean, I understand why people go down that road, thinking that, because, some of these imperialists are mad enough to do it, but I would urge everybody not to get into apocalyptic territory. If the imperialists thought that by nuking everybody that they could secure a win for themselves, they'd have done it in about 1950, when they could have done it and got away with it. But that's not how they secure a win. So don't go down the route of nuclear doomerism, I would say to everybody. They will probably try and start a war with China. if when this one finally peters out. That will also be a disaster with Taiwan or maybe the Philippines sacrificed. But then this is the other point about our discussion of this. We are not without agency with regard to this. The domestic class struggle will only get worse as the defeats of imperialism abroad intensify. And so we, as proletarians in the West, have the ability to affect this. We have the ability to stop them from making their wars. We have the ability to stop the war machine in its tracks. Should we be organized and determined and educated enough to do so, which is what we must aim to do. We must aim to reach a point where we can shut down their war machine and stop them in their destructive tasks, stop them in their bloodletting. This can all be done. The power of the working class is such that it could be done. All it lacks is education, leadership, and organization. That's rather a big free to address, but this is what we must work towards. Tim Gray says, do you think the faction of the US Western ruling class that want to bomb Russia with long-range missiles are probably to push until it happens? Or will they settle for switching the West for war in Asia? Some of them just want it to happen. Some of them are just doing this to prolong the war. And the reason why they want it to happen is some of them are mad enough to think that it will cause the Russians to capitulate. It won't. Some of them just think that it's a good way of prolonging the war. So, like, you need to make sure that there can't be any negotiations. This is one of the things that they are trying to guarantee with regard to Trump. Because Trump I have no faith in whatsoever, but they're worried that he might just take it into his head to do some sort of negotiation because he's a bit of an unpredictable character. So what they want is a situation where no negotiations whatsoever can take place. That's what the missile thing is probably about more than anything else. It's making sure that there can be no negotiation, no matter who wins. Now what it's said that that's what Zelensky has gone to Biden to try and seek guarantees on. It's why he's meeting with Harris and Trump. And this is the reason why there is the demand to use Western missiles on Russia. It's to guarantee that there won't be a negotiation. It's to guarantee the war just continues. That's what all of the activity of the British and the US state machines is about. Making sure the war doesn't end. Launching ATACMS missiles or Storm Shadows into Russia is all about that, making sure that the war doesn't end because there can be no negotiation. That's what we must bear in mind. Krasovet says the Western populace are so infuriatingly living with their heads in the sand. Years of desensitization to violence. Most people don't even watch the violence. Let's just say, like, most people are barely even aware. They'll be aware that there's a war going on in Ukraine, but they'll know nothing about it. It's presented in such a cartoonish fashion as to be unreal, which is what it is. It's unreal to them. Sid has also been using the word comprador for the past 5 or 6 years incessantly. Yeah, we need to bring these things back. The full horror of compradors needs to be brought home to people. EJWS says Starmer said sausages because of course his aides have him on some pathetic diet. Thought maybe Masonic code word or something, but the pain on his face was real. Yeah, they've probably got him on a diet of like a lettuce leaf and some cabbage broth every day. No bread, no protein, no dairy, nothing that could put an ounce of weight on him. He's being kept under lock and key perpetually. So his mind strayed to a sausage sandwich. Yeah, you're probably right. Mr. Chopin, hello to you out there in Kansas. Evan Wells asks, what action should Zelensky have taken upon the invasion, though? Or are you saying that the acting as a comprador regime leading up to the invasion is the upstream role that is culpable? I'm saying that since 1991, it's not just Zelensky. Forget him. He's not an individual of any real importance. It's the Ukrainian ruling class that we need to look at. So what have they done since 1991 that led us to this point? Well, they have, of course, encouraged year upon year the restoration of the fascist Banderite cult, especially in the west of Ukraine. They have deindustrialized the country. They have forced huge numbers of Ukrainians to migrate looking for work. They have, with their astonishing corruption, pilfered billions from Ukraine. They have reduced the population in Ukraine to poverty and desperation, and then manipulated them into thinking that the EU was some kind of solution. Hence, one of the reasons behind the Maidan events. They then staged a coup. They then started a civil war in an attempt to crush resistance to that coup. So forget Zelensky. It's the Ukrainian ruling class and the Ukrainian politicians since 1991 that are responsible for this mess. Now, as to what Zelensky could have done, now upon taking office, well, he could have enforced, as he said he would, the Minsk agreement. If he'd have done that, there'd have been no war. He could have, in 2022, have said, right, well, there's been an invasion. I will go. I'll go to Minsk. I ask Putin to come to Minsk and meet me, and we'll negotiate a settlement. And he could have appealed to the Ukrainian population to say, look, we must have peace. We must end this war. I must enact the program upon which I was elected. And he's done none of those things. Of course, he's just a puppet of first of Kolomoisky and then of the imperialists. But in reality, the responsibility for this situation lies in the rulers of Ukraine and the ruling class of Ukraine, and it goes back at least 30 years. So a comprador regime leads its people into the jaws of death. And that's what this regime has done for 30 years. Right, going down through the comments here. The Rumble channel, by the way, is called @ARMC82, just in case you're curious. Jude D says, Zelensky's victory plan and dreams of Russia's capitulation is like a drowning man demanding $1 million to accept the life belt. Yes, neat comparison there. Jeremy, we're never changing the musical introduction. We may even make it longer. Irish Partisan says, Ukrainians are collapsing in South Donetsk. Ugledar is being stormed right now. Yes, I saw that. Why on earth would the Russians feel the need to negotiate about anything other than the complete surrender of Ukraine? Right. Hello to Mutanda in a damp Hampshire, who was asking for a 2-hour musical introduction. We'll get working on it. Krista Kostadinov says, Zdravo. I believe that's hello in, is that Serbo-Croat? Svetlana asks, what's the Odyssey channel? I will advertise. The Odyssey channel's not been active for a while, so I'll advertise it. So I'll make sure it can be seen more widely. So yeah, I'll reactivation of the Odyssey channel coming right up. T.G. Wilson says, some Irish songs will be great. They had the first Red Army in Europe, after all, after the Irish Citizens Army was founded in 1916, then in respect to the writings of James Connolly. Yes, I believe he met Roddy Connolly, was it? Connolly's son, and said that he'd studied Connolly's book on the Irish agriculture. So yes, you're right. Irish rebel songs would be good to include. Some diversification, shall we say. Perhaps we could do a different introduction. So like for the Ukraine war update, we can have it more focused on Soviet and Slavic and like songs. For West Asia, we could have it with the songs of the resistance movements of the Arab world and maybe Iran. And for Europe, we could include things like Irish rebel songs. We will take that into consideration. T.G. Wilson says, I've been on VK for years rather than Meta, as it's called now. Lucas says, the CIA have lots of garages because all US monopolies are said to have started in a garage. Yeah, well, the garage being called DARPA. Harold says, I don't think Zelensky will be safe in Florida. Plenty of disgruntled Ukrainians there too. Indeed, indeed. Krasovet says Russia doesn't want Zelensky dead because he's so unpopular with Ukrainians. That's true. Ian's followed us on Rumble and on Odyssey. If somebody's got the Odyssey link, can you post it in the chat? Thank you very much. I would do, but I can't navigate off the screen right now. Ian says, views on the election of the AKD in Sri Lanka. Tune in tomorrow for more on that, Ian. I need to do some reading up on them. Rista Kostadinov says Albania and Kosovo have so many statues from American presidents other than Reagan in Poland. I don't know any other country having statues. Yeah, it's pretty fucking sickening, to be honest. There's a Reagan statue in Sofia, Bulgaria. Jesus Christ. Luca says there was a round of applause when Sir Keir said the UK will stand with Ukraine for as long as it takes, and the arch-deluded petty bourgeois and treacherous unions attending the Labour conference. Well, that's the basis of the Labour Party, as I said on X. Labour Party is a party of scabs. It's a party of by and for scabs. It's a party for the most disgusting elements within, like, the upper end of the working class. The people who'd sell their class, their community, their country, their people out for an expense account and a holiday in, the Caribbean, maybe on Epstein's Island. Like, this is the scab party. It's a party which is not designed to aid the working class. It's designed to imprison the working class. It's why it needs to be destroyed. That and the politics it represents needs to be absolutely politically destroyed before we can move onwards. Social democracy in Britain and in the West is a disgusting lie. And they're all scab parties. They're all pro-imperialist parties. They're all in favour of mass slaughter and genocide. They're all revolting, and they all need to be pushed into the dustbin of history. Abolish NATO says, free the sausages. Free the sausages now. Freak Unique's enjoying the Hale and Pace reference. More of those coming up. American Hypocrite says, I even look like Lenin. Well, thank you for the compliment, good sir. I'm sure you meant it that way. Russia never invaded, says Harold. The USA invaded Ukraine through surreptitious means. You don't have to send an army in to take control of a country. The Americans had almost total control of Ukraine from 2004 onwards. Only briefly interrupted by Yanukovych, but not by much. Mary joins us late, and I've done you one better than talking about releasing the sausages. I've played the clip, so go back to the beginning and you'll see it. I recommend Opera Free VPN for all the news channels we are denied in the West. Yeah, I use Proton because I use the email of that as well. The Risen People era says, failed to implement any of the agreements at the time, even when the people of the Donbass wanted to remain part of Ukraine under a federal system, but they continued striking and pushing. Interestingly enough, it looks like the Georgians and the Russians might reach agreements about the status of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which are along the lines of what was being suggested in Ukraine. The Georgians have evidently reached this conclusion that being the Americans' battering ram is not a sensible idea, and so they better make peace or reach a settlement with the Russians, and the future lies more in the east for them than the west. Yes, I know that the Georgian Dream politicians keep talking about the EU, but I think that's to sort of placate some of the voters in Georgia. But thankfully, the Georgians have reached a sensible conclusion, which is get the hell out of the Western orbit while you still can. Pashinyan, though, is determined to pursue this course to the bitter end. I'm sure that the bitter end may involve, well, I hope it doesn't involve this, but it will probably involve Azerbaijan absorbing all of Armenia. That's the end that Pashinyan will end up giving to Armenia. The The risen people say 9 years down the line that Russia took action, or 20 years really since the so-called Orange Revolution. But all of that is left out of the left's narrative in the West for the most part. Yeah, for the Western left, I mean, I said the Labour Party is a scab party. Most of the Western left are scab organisations. They're scab organisations. They are pro-imperialist organisations. They're racist organisations. They are counter-revolutionary organisations, and they always have been. Forget the left. They're then I won't say they're irrelevant, but they're an obnoxious, useless entity that is only there to do services for the ruling class. Mutanda asks, which is the least billionaire-owned streaming platform? Interesting. Don't know. We'll aim to find out. Scrolling down. YouTube has censored the Odyssey link, says Ian. Oh, I'm not surprised. I urge anyone to learn about the roots of the Labour Party and to watch the CPGBML, the perfidious Labour Party book launch. Indeed, indeed. And if you're in Britain and you want to get organised, you should join the CPGBML and help us build a real communist movement in this country. Right. N Snow says, what do you think about Midwestern Marx? Well, I've interviewed Carlos a couple of times. I think they do very interesting and valuable work on political education. Don't agree with all their perspectives, but then again, they probably don't agree with all of mine. So, but I think the role that they're playing in the ACP is a very positive one, and I think it's a welcome development that in the US you have this project pursuing or trying to promote serious political Marxist education, which you haven't had for decades. So I think they play a very positive role. Right, okay. So by tomorrow then, I think I will take away from this discussion the need to research Russian-friendly alternatives. Maybe we need to look at some of the Chinese platforms as well. I'm not sure how that would work, but certainly there's a research job here for me to look into other options here. So I'm going to go away and look at that. Tomorrow we will be back with the West Asian update, and we will be with you at the same time. That is 7:45 British time tomorrow. Thanks to everybody who has joined us today. Thanks to everybody who supports the show on Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. Check out those links in the description below if you want to support the program. Until tomorrow, though, I will say to you, good night and solidarity.
你。
Wschodzi obficie dojrzałe ziarno.